Hello and good evening, everyone. Welcome to this week's episode of Primetime Gaming with Mr. BoomStick and friends. And ladies and gentlemen, yes, that's what we have done. We have loaded up the friendship bus and we are here. And man, talk about having to call an audible at the last second. Phil Spencer out here dropping virtual bombs on the industry. And of course, we have Tom Warren out there doing what he does best, and that is putting out great tweets with all of the information. And folks, not only are we going to be talking about what Phil Spencer had to say, and even the fact that, wow, maybe Game Pass might be raising in price. And you know what? I have no problem with that simply because of the value proposition of what we're currently playing. You can't argue that a price increase was not expected. I would imagine that as long as it's not gross and not consumer friendly, that I wouldn't have a problem with it. I would imagine that, like Hulu and Netflix and Disney Plus and all of the other services that we all pay for, they have gone up. I mean, even YouTube Premium has gone up, especially the family plan, and it didn't go up by $1; it went up by $5. To be honest with you, and me and Mrs. Boomstick share that. And sometimes if you can walk away from the service, but I don't like commercials. So that's why I pay for the premium. But that's not the only thing we're going to be talking about. We are very, very privileged to have Luke Steele, who is someone that has not only gone up against the CMA, but he is an acquisitions lawyer, and he has been on this show before. He has a great amount of insight to what has been going on with ABK. We have some questions that we're going to be, really getting into. And we got some information on literally a land shark that Microsoft is bringing in tow to go up against the CMA. And we're going to be talking about what she brings to the table and what she has fought against. And I'll be bringing, give you her name once we get to that story. But let's welcome in Luke Steele. Luke, how the heck are you, brother? Welcome back.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's not been too long actually since I was here. So and yeah, the CMA, as Dutch said pre-show, the CMA bat signal goes up, and then I can kind of jet in Arkham style. So yeah, it's really good to be here. Yeah, I'm looking forward to these topics. Some really good ones.
Yeah, you know what? And listen, we're glad to have you here. We do have some questions we're going to have you breaking down. And just let the cat out of the bag. The woman that I'm talking about, and I want to give her name properly. She is an antitrust attorney. Her name is Rima Aleli, and her main job is to help close mergers at one of the most busy or acquisitive companies, Microsoft. And she helped block a deal for the industry that actually shocked me. I didn't know so much about this. Her and her team were responsible for blocking the NVIDIA ARMS chip deal. That was her and her team that did that. So I got a lot of people that were asking, "Oh man, she helped block the deal. Is she really someone that you want trying to win the deal for Microsoft?" The answer is yes, you absolutely do, because she is, like I said, she's not known by a lot of circles, but I can tell you right now, people that I spoke to, she is legit awesome. And I think that with her knowledge and her know-how and her team's know-how, I think that this deal gets passed with little to no concessions. But we're going to get into that momentarily. Let's continue with the introductions. Wandering Dutch, brother, welcome back. Best beard in the business. How the heck are you?
Yeah, I'm good. Yeah, it's great to be back as usual. Of course, on the back of my podcast, a little bit of chill time, and then straight on this one. So it's always good. I'm looking forward to jumping into this. Like I say, you've got the right person for the job this week. Of course, with Luke and his specified role. He's got experience with this type of stuff, so it's you're going to get the best proper responses to these things, and not just, of course, the wonderful Everborn's inquisitive and wild mind that goes on with some of his speculation.
His
but it's,
theories are quite
yeah.
off the wall, which
Oh, yeah.
Asante knows all too well.
I'm sure I don't know what you're talking about. No.
But listen, it's great to have you, Dutch, and great job you and Boxenberg for your sit-down interview with the developers from Deliver Us the Moon. That was a game that came out a couple of years ago. Absolutely fantastic. They have Deliver Us, I believe it's Deliver Us Mars is the next one.
That's
and
right.
it's phenomenal, coming out early next year.
What surprised me about that, Boom, is they are actually based where I grew up, and I didn't even realize they're in my town, a specific town in the Netherlands, which is a pretty small place. It's not the biggest
Holy
of
cow.
towns. I know that really.
That's crazy. It goes to show you that it is, in fact, a small world after all.
They've offered to go around and see the studio when I'm next there, so it's awesome from them.
Dude, that's awesome. I would definitely make sure you tape that for sure. But Crispy Bomb, you're gonna have a few things to say. What's going on, brother? How you feeling?
Oh, feeling great. What up, chat? Luke, good to have you on, and let's get it on.
Yeah. Oh, yes. We're definitely going to get it on. And of course, I like the Omaha, because you know what? That mofo has hurt the Steelers so many times with his Omahas. I know exactly what you were talking about because I'm a diehard Steeler fan and we suck this year. But anyway, let's welcome into Mag. How you doing,
Yes,
brother?
sir.
Life has grabbed you by the balls. Real life. You haven't had much time to make any shenanigans videos or even play games for that matter. We're glad to have you here. How you doing?
Oh man, it's an absolute pleasure to be able to take a break from the real world and dealing with the corporate clowns and everything else. God willing that they're not listening to me say things like that. But anyhow, it's an absolute pleasure. Yes, I haven't been doing many videos, but you know what? I will be getting back into it. Hopefully in the beginning of next week. I'm only about halfway through the COD Modern Warfare 2 campaign. Absolutely wonderful. I think it's wonderful. Anyway, I know there's a lot of
with IGN. I mean, they gave it a 6 out of 10 because they thought it was the biggest piece of crap. In years. But,
yeah, exactly. You know, the narrative is Microsoft ruins everything, and they've already ruined it, even though they haven't even acquired it yet. But, you know, that's how it goes. Anyhow, we got some great things to talk about. We got Luke Skywalker's here tonight. He has actually got, you know what? Like everybody said, the man's a lawyer. You can't argue with him. And if you try, you're probably going to lose the case. Anyways, we got a great show for you guys tonight. Let's get right into it.
Nice. And last and no way least, actually, usually the first one here, last one today, Asante. What's going on, brother? How you feeling?
Yeah, I understand what you mean, Mag, when you say corporate shenanigans. I've been dealing with crap all day today, so it is what it is. But I'm happy to be here. I'm surprised my other half is not here, excited because he enjoys debating with lawyers. So it will be interesting. But no, I'm happy to be here. I hear the stories are very interesting this week, so I'm thrilled to go now. Dutch, I did see your interview this it was this morning, wasn't it, or this afternoon? I caught it later after the
yesterday
fact.
Actually it was
yesterday. Okay, so I watched it today. My question is Gorilla next? Because I know where they are in Utrecht. I've actually been there. So if Gorilla's next, I'm there for you. I'll hold your camera. It's all good.
We shall see. We shall see.
I love it. Well, listen, ladies and gentlemen, let's open up with the reason why we brought Luke in, his expertise. Now, Luke, the story that I pulled is from theinformation.com. It was written by Aaron Holmes. It was posted on October 21st. And basically, the lead article line is how a Microsoft antitrust attorney keeps its mega acquisitions from getting killed. And it also goes on to say antitrust regulators have mostly spooked big tech companies away from doing big acquisitions, but Microsoft is getting bolder in its deal making, such as its $69 billion bid for Activision, Blizzard, and King. And a low-profile Microsoft attorney, Rima Aleli, is working to keep it that way. And she is, according to the story, Aleli is helping fend off similar efforts to sink one of the largest acquisitions in tech history. And of course, we're talking about the $69 billion takeover of video game publisher Activision, Blizzard, and King, which faces investigations from the British and European regulators and, of course, the FTC, as well as opposition from Microsoft, specifically their rival in Sony. Sony seems to be the only one that actually has a problem with this deal. And again, we're not going to go down a deep rabbit hole. Specifically about why Sony is crying the way they are. They've been in first place for 20 plus years. They don't like playing fair. They have played dirty their entire PlayStation life, and we've seen it even get even more filthy with some of the deals that they have done to keep games specifically off of Xbox, but more importantly, out of Xbox Game Pass. Their dirty tactics are front and center. Their discontent for any kind of challenge to their first place position is met with things that we see more often than not for PlayStation. Right? We've seen how they have cross-play fees for developers and publishers, so that only games can be played via PlayStation. And if you do want to have crossplay, you have to pay this. According to Everborn Saga, he calls it the a-hole tax. We've seen things like monies being given to developers and publishers to keep games off of Xbox Game Pass. They block Game Pass additions through their contract making, and they've done many anti-consumer things to keep games away from Xbox gamers, whereas, as we've seen, Microsoft has had it a different way, and they intend to do a different way. And we're going to be talking about what Phil Spencer said in a monster interview, specifically about Game Pass potentially raising in price, but also Call of Duty being treated like Minecraft. That's going to be the second half of the show. But Luke, I want to go to the first question here. Today, Everborn Saga, who's not here yet, hopefully he will get here. The CMA put out a tweet where they announced that they approved the London Stock Exchange Group / Quantile merger review. They passed it, no issues. Again, the CMA normally doesn't do this. I thought it was a little weird the way that their social media presence has exploded on the scene, especially when they first started talking about their phase one and how they were concerned about Sony's position in the market and where that would be after this deal, which seemed a little weird to me, especially with that they were using block emojis and things that a 19-year-old would use, not a mega corporation that's funded by the government or an arm of the government. But Everborn's question was simply this, Luke. Please get Luke's thoughts on Microsoft's response to the CMA and see if he sees any parallels to the London Stock Exchange Group Quantile merger. What's your answer for that?
Oh, it's a big question. I mean, in terms of, are there any similarities, I suppose, between the deal that the CMA announced was passing through today and the Microsoft one? So for context, ignoring the actual details of what this merger was with the London Stock Exchange and Quantile, but for context, this was a merger that, like the Microsoft Activision one, had been analysed at phase one by the CMA, and the CMA had found that there was a realistic prospect of a substantial lessening of competition, which is the test that they apply at phase one. And so there's, the same thing happened in this deal as well. There was then a period of CMA analysis in phase two. And then today, they actually announced that they had passed it. The CMA were letting it go, essentially, with no remedies requested. They found that on the balance of probabilities, it was unlikely that there would be a substantial lessening of competition. Now, that's pretty much, I guess, where the similarities end, because it's really difficult to compare and almost pointless comparing one, competition case with a regulator to another, because they operate in such entirely distinct markets that it's impossible to draw any parallels, apart from the fact that they go through similar processes, right? The one similarity here, I guess, was that the CMA were looking at vertical integration problems, which is one of the limbs of inspection that they have on the Microsoft Activision one as well. So when they talk about Call of Duty and input foreclosure and, Microsoft limiting Activision's content from other platforms and stuff like that, that's a vertical analysis where you've got kind of two entities in a supply chain. So Microsoft as I suppose a publisher in this instance, and then Activision as a developer. Even though Activision are also a publisher. But anyway, that's how the CMA are looking at it. So the London Stock Exchange case also had vertical considerations. But again, this was in a derivatives market. It was something just entirely different. So it's impossible really to draw any parallels with it. But it does show, I think one thing that is helpful for people perhaps is that it does show that, phase 2 is not necessarily something to be, really concerned about if you want the deal to progress. The CMA do, take stuff to phase 2. The phase 2 test is a lot higher. Substantial lessening of competition has to be likely as a result of the merger, not just a prospect of it, right? So this case, I guess, is a reminder that they do look at this stuff in a slightly different way in phase 2, and obviously the test they have to meet is higher, and sometimes that can mean that they don't have any reasonable ground to block it, or to ask for remedies or anything like that. So it's useful in that sense, but not really in terms of similarities with Microsoft Activision.
Now, I just want to clear something up for a lot of people that may not understand, because I had to ask Luke myself backstage. When he says remedies, what he's referring to is what here in the States is considered concessions.
Yeah.
Concessions, as you know, are things that the FTC could potentially ask for Microsoft to agree in order to pass the deal. And that's exactly what remedies means in the EU, in the UK. So that's that. I mean, I appreciate that you being honest. There's some similarities, but there isn't a one-to-one here. So my next question to you, and then after I'm done with this question, everyone on the panel, please, by all means, if you have something you want to ask Luke specifically regarding this deal, please do not hesitate to ask that. But Everborn wanted me to also discuss the Microsoft's response. Obviously, when the CMA came out for like the third time, and they put up all of these things that they were concerned with, Microsoft immediately came back with counteroffensive points, and a lot of their points seem to. Again, I'm not doing this from a fanboy's point of view. I'm doing it from a logistic point of view. It seemed to have crushed a lot of the CMA's concerns moving this into phase 2. I'm just curious to get your opinion on, because there were a lot of people in the community that were a little shocked with how can I say it, aggressive Microsoft was in their response to the CMA's issues with what you were saying earlier about potential footholds for competition. What were your personal thoughts, like as an attorney and as a gamer, on both sides of your brain? How aggressive was this response from Microsoft?
I think it's an interesting question. I think I can see what people mean about aggression, but it's interesting. The regulatory process, like the competition process, when you're working with a regulator, I think a lot of people think that they look at it and go, well, it must be adversarial in nature, like it must be as if you're kind of battling against the regulator. And I guess in a sense you kind of are, if the regulator takes a different view of a merger than you do, because obviously you're going to want to paint a merger in a certain light because you want it to go through, right? But a regulator might have a different view. But actually, in practice, it's very collaborative. So there's it's very cordial, and Microsoft response may look aggressive, but it's kind of standard language for this sort of stuff. So what they're trying to do, and it wasn't, it was Microsoft's response, but it was written by, I think, Weil Gottschall, who are a very big law firm. The aim of that statement is to just kind of counteract every theory of harm that the CMA raised in phase one. Now, in essence, it's a bit of a waste of time. Like, it's not a waste of time for a reason I'll get into in a minute, but it's like it's a thing you do in the process, right? After the CMA give their phase one decision, if they're taking it to a phase two, that is, then as the merging party, you write a response to it, because the CMA will publish that, and that may influence the views of other people, of the public or third parties who might come across and read it. It's part of that kind of transparency procedure, really. So and I mean, I read it, and I think for the most part their arguments are very sound. Like, I didn't read anything that was ridiculous. Some understatement and overstatement here and there, but that's to be expected, because they're gonna paint stuff in a light that's favorable to them. But I thought it was, rational and logical, and a good kind of back to the CMA, really, which takes it on to phase two. And I think, it was definitely, like I say, it wasn't aggressive, but they really wanted to try and very clearly delineate the CMA's claims and try and show how they were incorrect as factually as possible as you can do in that document. Because bearing in mind, they know that document's made public, right? So you can't, it's not as if you can go into super amounts of detail concerning information that might be relevant. And if anybody's seen the document, you'll see it has all these snips in it at various points, which is simply redacted information because they don't want that to be public. Right. So it was a good response. I think the thing that people perhaps miss with this stuff is that, again, this isn't adversarial. It's not like Microsoft aren't arguing against a jury, right? The right. CMA are judge, jury, and executioner in this. So obviously, if they were putting out this document to a bunch of jurors, for example, it might be very persuasive in convincing jurors, that this merger should go through. But really, it's against the CMA, and the CMA, may well disagree with it. And as I say, CMA are judge, jury, and executioner. So what they think is the ultimate arbiter of this, right? Like, that's the ultimate decider. But it may focus the panel for phase two of the CMA in such a way that they're more favorable now towards the idea of the merger because of this response and because of the discussions they've had with Microsoft, etc. So, it's kind of this little psychological, meta battle almost, to try and convince, the CMA panel that the phase one inquiry was fine. Okay, we accept that. But going into phase two, we don't think any of this is likely to cause competition concerns. And here's a very brief summary of why. That's what the response was. So a good summary, but it's not as if that's the nail in the coffin of the CMA. It isn't. It's just something that they'll look at.
Right. Now I want to bring Kay Asante into the conversation, because Kay Asante, there was a specific wording that was used by Everborn Saga when you and him sat down with Jez Corden over the weekend on your absolutely astounding new episode of the Gaming Circle podcast. If you missed that, that was last Saturday. You definitely got to check that out. There was a specific wording that was used in regards to evidence being used for Microsoft. Please elaborate that with Luke, because I don't remember the terminology.
Sure. No worries at all. And I also have a question I want to ask Luke as well. The term you're looking for was, we were batting back and forth the idea of qualitative versus quantitative analysis that was being done, and at a high level, basically analysis being done based on raw data and facts, where the facts lead you, versus if I'm not mistaken, please correct me if I'm wrong, Luke, here, versus the alternative, which would be fact finding to to fill in gaps where you assume that their gaps would be, even though the facts would then obviously lead to that destination, right? It's almost a foregone conclusion. I know this is this.
Yep.
Now I'm going to find the details to fill in those gaps. That is qualitative versus quantitative, and they specifically made mention of doing a qualitative analysis of the situation vis-a-vis the market conditions, which we thought was very, very unusual, being that market conditions by its very nature is a quantitative kind of exercise, right? You have your dollars and cents, you see where things are going. Why would that not be your first port of call? Why would it be quantitative versus qualitative? You understand what I'm saying?
Yep.
Yeah.
I think it's an interesting point. I can see why Microsoft raised it. I actually thought it was one of the weakest points that they put through in the document, and I'll explain the rationale for that now. Which is, they're absolutely right that in most other circumstances, the analysis that you undertake in anything, right, is qualitative. It's based on hard factual data, especially market conditions. But competition regulators can't just do that, because they're not looking at they're not only looking at the state of the market now. They have to hypothesize about what would happen under the merger. And nobody knows that, right? It's more quantitative in nature. We can, use theory and theorem and try and predict, and use values to try and predict where the market will go. But we can't, we don't have any factual data. There's nothing that says on paper, well, 5 years into the future, if you let this go through, this will happen.
Yeah.
And it's a difficult job that regulators have as a result, competition regulators. And I see this criticism levied sometimes of them. It's like, they're looking too much about what will happen. Well, yeah, that's their job. Like, that's the whole point. Otherwise, why would you have this process? So obviously a competition regulator has to walk a fine line with it. Like, they can't just espouse some notion that's in the future so unrealistic, based on some quantitative analysis that's so ridiculous, right? They can't just do that. They have to put that in writing. They have to explain their rationale. I'm sure the CMA have done that in the background. Obviously, we're not going to be privy to that because it's quite confidential methods of assessment, etc., using actual data. But I didn't find that argument from Microsoft particularly compelling. I know why they raised it, though. I completely understand why they raised it. If I was in that position, I would have raised it as well, because I think obviously the CMA, when they're looking at theories of harm in particular, they're kind of, they said in the response, right, some of these were novel to Microsoft, and some of them are novel. Now the CMA can do that when they think about a theory of harm. They can, it doesn't have to be like some set down precedent. Again, this isn't an adversarial court case, right? There's no stare decisis. There's no like precedent that applies to the CMA. They can just come up with this stuff, provided they have some basis in it. But I thought that was a pretty good argument as well from Microsoft. Probably better than the quantitative versus qualitative.
So understood. One, and to your point of it being basically a back and forth and a collaborative effort, that dovetails well into a question I wanted to ask you. I've always actually wanted to know from someone with your experience level. I've actually, as these things go, we've all been paying such close attention to people like Hogue Law and all that, who he himself admittedly says he has a more of a grasp of the American system than he does the UK system, and he's been doing some research in that field. We were speaking when you were talking about ultimately when the decision is made, you're saying the CMA is the judge, jury, and executioner. On the American side, the FTC's version of it, if you will, the FTC, you get things like, oh well, if they want to challenge the merger, you can sue for various options and present your case, and hopefully it gets overturned. I've heard disparate, differing reports of it. Some say there are options available. Others say, well, once the cat can argue with how they came to the process, or if there was an issue with process, but once they've come to their conclusion, there is no question about it. How does it that square for you? Are there options to be made once the final decision is made, or are your only options how they came to that decision?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. The options depend on what the CMA wants, first of all. So presuming it took it after a phase 2 analysis, it said, we don't like this, so we want X, Y, and Z, right? We want some remedies, some concessions. If they did that, and you're in Microsoft are in a position where they don't like any of what's suggested, and they negotiate, because there is a period of negotiation as well, right? So they can try and talk the CMA down from some of this if they wanted to. But let's say that breaks down for whatever reason, and the CMA just go, nope, this is our line in the sand. So the process is then it's basically as you described. It's different from the US process because the CMA is a non-governmental ministerial body, which in the UK means it can only be challenged on certain grounds vis-a-vis its decisions. So you can go to the Competition Appeals Tribunal, and you can challenge the CMA kind of on 3 grounds, basically. One is illegality, so they've done something illegal. One is irrationality. That's a ridiculously high threshold. Nobody has ever done it. Nobody has ever attempted to do it. They will not try and do it in this case, so I'm almost hesitant to mention it, but it does exist. And the third one is basically some procedural error, effectively. So the CMA have done something in the scope of their power, but they've done it incorrectly, right? They've applied something incorrectly. So you're right in that you can't go to the tribunal and challenge the CMA because you don't like the outcome of their assessment. You can only say, we don't like the way you've arrived at the assessment because of these reasons, right? So the most recent example of that was the Meta Giphy challenge, which is a good example of what might happen if Microsoft were inclined to go down that route. And then because of the way UK law works and because of the nature of the challenge, all the Competition Appeals Tribunal can do is, if they agreed with Microsoft, let's say they said, yeah, the CMA have committed a bunch of procedural errors, we don't like this, they revert it back to the CMA to basically do the things that they should have done.
Back to scratch, from
back to scratch,
and all of it starts again. Yep, I recall reading that.
Well, just back to the start, kind of a phase 2, basically.
Phase 2,
that
okay.
phase. Mm-hmm. So then the CMA obviously will do the things that they should have done. If they come to the same let's say they do it right, they do it lock stop, and they come to the same conclusion, which is exactly the thing that happened in Meta Giphy. They just said, yeah, we've taken a look at that, cat, thank you very much, but we don't think it affects our judgment at all. Then there is one further thing you can do, is you can appeal to CAT to take it to the Court of Appeal in the UK, which is a broad civil court. But again, you can only take it on exactly the same basis that CAT have analysed it. So illegality, irrationality, procedural impropriety, let's say. And you even have to get permission from CAT to do that. Or you can sometimes try and subvert them and go directly to the Court of Appeal. It's really, really, really hard to get to that stage, because most of the time CAT will say there's absolutely no point you going to the Court of Appeal because you're basically wasting their time. Like, we've looked at it, we think this. The CMA have looked at it again, they think this. There is no chance you'll succeed. And again, even if you go to the Court of Appeal, what Court of Appeal do? They send it back to the CMA. So even if they agreed. So the only things you ever see go that far are things like if the CMA imposes like a penalty fine for something and the parties are like adamant that's a unreasonable fine because there's a specific ground you can challenge them on that basis. So that's kind of the broad procedure. I know it's pretty boring, but hopefully helpful.
No,
Not at
it's-
all.
It's
There's many
very
people-
informative. Yeah,
Yeah, there's a
absolutely.
lot of people in
Yeah, it
here
is.
that are digging. Well, because a lot of the stuff I didn't know.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Mac.
I learned something
Yeah,
new today. That is awesome.
Well, that's why I'm very quiet for once in a lifetime. I do have two things I wanted to ask you, Luke. And the first thing I wanted to ask is, I understand you were saying the different avenues that they can go down if they have differing opinions at the end of this. Now, the thing is, can they go now? Do you think that Microsoft maybe? I know you said they probably won't, but is there a possibility that they could push further down for further appeal because it's such a huge deal? Probably the biggest deal in tech history. Never mind video games. We're just talking about in tech in general. $70 billion. Would they be willing? Do you? I mean, I know you say they may not, but I mean, is there a possibility that they would go to the end of the line of appeal just because of such a huge deal?
Oh yeah, I mean, look, you're absolutely right. Like, this is a huge merger for them. As you say, it's probably the biggest in tech history, or it is the biggest in tech history, essentially.
Yes, it is. Yeah.
By value. So, and look, Microsoft have extremely deep pockets to really want to litigate the crap out of this if they, if they're that way inclined. I think I think the only issue is because of the way that the UK system works, they would be less inclined to do it if they didn't think that something the CMA had done under those three grounds that I mentioned was so fundamental to their decision that they actually used it and arrived at the wrong decision as a result. With the FTC, it's much easier to go and actually have a huge battle, right, and throw lawyers ridiculous charge out rates at it. Like, it's very easy for them to do that. Little more difficult in the UK and also the EU, which is similar-ish procedure as well. But absolutely, I mean, if they got to that stage, I don't think it will get to that stage, but if it got to that stage, they might think, you know what, like, it's too valuable a deal, just let slip.
That's what I'm thinking.
We're willing to spend $500,000 on lawyer fees just to try and battle this. Yeah, which is nothing to Microsoft.
It's a dime in the bucket for them.
Yeah.
I do have a second question. I think this is something that's probably reflecting a lot of people, not only in the chat, but a lot of people in the community wondering, and I know I'm one of them, what is the overall global impact of the CMA? Like, let's say, for example, it doesn't go in a favorable direction for Microsoft. Yeah. How does this affect the deal in its entirety overall, like globally? Like, I mean, does it, if the CMA doesn't, if they have, like if they just basically shut it down in one way or another, or they ask for different stipulations or so on and so forth, and all of a sudden, how does that affect the entire, you know what I mean, the deal overall globally?
It's a good question. I think it's a question that some people, there are lots of different answers to this, but there are actually only a few correct ones, so I'll try and explain them.
Can I have them? Because I've heard so many different stories, right? It's like people say the CMA means nothing. Yeah, it's still going to go through, and I'm like, well, that doesn't make any sense. But yes, please carry on.
Yeah, so there's kind of one answer, and then if that's not the case, there's like another answer basically. So I think what people miss about the deal, and I get that people miss this because they would never have done it, but in merger agreements, right, you have a split between when you sign the agreement and then when it completes, when it consummates, when Microsoft actually own Activision in this case. So they already signed the deal back in January, right? And then the merger agreement has a bunch of conditions, and the conditions have to be satisfied before they can actually say, right, okay, we're done, right? Activision, you're part of Microsoft now. And a lot of those conditions are commercial in nature. They might, a lot are also legal. They're kind of legal procedure, mumbo jumbo stuff, which I won't get into detail on. But one of the main ones, and you can see this because in the SEC filings that Activision Blizzard made when they had to get the shareholder approval for this deal, they talked about the merger agreement in broad terms. Obviously, they didn't show it because it's confidential, but they said, these are a bunch of things that we have to do under the merger agreement. One of the conditions specifically was that they needed the regulatory approval of the CMA, the EU Commission, and the FTC/DOJ, alongside any other relevant competition authorities, right? So they named those three specifically, and that's, you know, in my experience, like I see that on big acquisitions, you see that condition all the time, right? It's very common, pretty standard.
So what constitutes relevant? Like, for example, like they just said, you know, we talked about it 2 weeks ago on this very show. We were talking about Brazil. We were talking, and then all of a sudden Saudi Arabia. Like, are they part of the conversation, or like of what would be considered relevant on a global scale for the deal?
It's basically any competition authority where you have to notify them because of this deal. Now, technically speaking, actually, you don't have to notify the CMA. It's a voluntary procedure, which is going to sound really weird. But if you look at the Meta Giphy case, the problem is that the CMA can retrospectively look at your deal. So they can say you should have notified us because it fell into the UK law on this. Nice. So actually now we're going to look at it and analyze it and do our phase 1, phase 2. And the problem with Facebook and Meta and Giphy is that they just didn't notify the CMA. They completed the deal, it was done, and then the CMA went, oh, you know what? Actually, we really don't like this at all. So they had a big problem. But anyway, I'm digressing slightly. So the Microsoft and Activision done the right thing here, which is to say they're like, we're not completing anything until we have regulatory approval. Now, this is relevant because if you can't fulfill a condition, you're effectively in breach of contract. And in fact, some conditions are so fundamental to a contract that if you don't fulfill them, you can't complete the deal. A regulatory competition condition like this, and I think they mention this in the merger agreement, they say it may, if it's not fulfilled, it may just stop the deal, right? So what I mean by that is if the CMA go, no, you know, we're not giving you any approval at all, worst case scenario, that would probably on its own be enough to tank the deal entirely worldwide. It would just end it. You had this with, I think, NVIDIA ARM, for example, they had this in their merger agreement as well. And there was another recent fairly big one, which I forget. But
they would have taken over 80% of the market if that deal would have went through. ARM would have been... NVIDIA would have been like literally the rulers of the planet when it came to chip making.
Yeah. So that was a bit different anyway. But the crux of it was that they didn't get, you know, regulatory approval from the CMA, and therefore, you know, the couldn't complete the condition under the merger agreement, and they couldn't do the thing that the merger agreement contemplates. So I think people miss that, right? That's like a pre-step to all of the other stuff, which is to say, and this is something that I've said like day one, just because I've been involved in this stuff and like actually like written these conditions and been involved in it, is that it's so fundamental to the deal that if you don't fulfill the condition, your agreement basically says it's dead, right? And you can go back and have a look at other cases where, you know, a regulator has torpedoed it, and in some press releases, you know, the companies involved will say, you know, we couldn't complete the deal because our agreement said this, and we can't fulfill that condition. So that's like the first answer.
But you don't likely think that that's what's going to happen with this deal. I think Microsoft has already put out there that they are looking not to take Call of Duty away. They literally, the head of Microsoft Gaming literally just said today that they are going to treat Call of Duty like Minecraft, which makes sense. So I would imagine that
it's always made sense. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think, is it safe to assume, Luke, that because this deal is so important, not just for Call of Duty, because that's what PlayStation wants you to think. They have painted it like it's only about Call of Duty, when I'm here to tell you that in fact is not the case at all. There's a lot more here. Do you think that that Microsoft is going to be willing to offer up concessions even before they're asked?
I think they would be willing to do it, but as always, you know, it's difficult because you don't know what a regulator wants, right? They don't know that's the reason they didn't offer any concessions or remedies in phase 1, because they don't know what the CMA will want. And you can theorize a little bit because the CMA have actively told you, you know, here's the 3 areas that we're looking into, one of which, as you say, is kind of Activision content, but specifically Call of Duty. But the other 2 I'd be more worried about if I was Microsoft, because, you know, they concern multi-game subscriptions and cloud gaming services. Those are the other two kind of areas the CMA don't like. But the problem is that Microsoft don't know what remedies the CMA want until the CMA say these are the remedies we want. Now there is a discussion around that. They will talk to the CMA about it before the CMA actually make public to say, these are what we want. And I think Microsoft would be willing to do stuff, but if the CMA are going to do things like, and we said discussed this pre-show, like this, the competition regulators dislike behavioral remedies. So where you say you're going to do something, even if that's contractual, they don't like that, because ultimately they say, well, you could just get out of a there are ways and means of getting out of a contract. They don't last forever. So we're back to square one. They don't like those kind of remedies. What they really like is structural ones where you divest yourself of something, which is exactly the type of thing they've just ordered Facebook to do, right? I mean, they blocked the deal anyway, but they said, look, you've got to sell Giphy to a third party. That's divestiture. And are Microsoft going to entertain the idea, for example, if the CMA say, you know what, we're so worried about Call of Duty that we want you to sell it. We want you to sell the IP to a third party. There's no way Microsoft are going to do that, because It's kind of one of the cruxes of this entire deal. So I don't know. I think Microsoft would offer remedies, but I have no idea what the CMA want. That's the problem, and that's what Microsoft are grappling with. They're probably they want to work with the CMA. They're willing to perhaps offer some concessions, but the CMA might want stuff that is really out of the wheelhouse of Microsoft in terms of kind of, again, torpedoing the deal, making it commercially illogical, that sort of stuff, right?
Interesting. First of all, I want to welcome in 3-Bit joining us. What's going on, 3-Bit? How you been, brother? Long time, no time.
Yeah, it's been a while.
It certainly has, man. You've been busy doing your development thing. How are you?
Yeah, I'm Microsoft kind of an employee, kind of. So working on Fables. It's been good. It's been good.
Nice. Very good. Well, listen, it's great to have you here, part of the conversation. Wandering Dutch, do you want to ask Luke any questions regarding, because he's been dropping some major bombs, and again, at the end of the day, we'll get his final opinion on where he thinks this deal is ultimately going to fall. What would you like to run past Luke?
Yeah. So me and Luke have had the pleasure of speaking about this in depth on a number of occasions now, but I think it's more not for myself, more for more people in the chat, of course. I think because there's obviously a lot of terminology used in your answer before, Luke, as you can probably imagine, and I think a lot of people are still a little bit mixed up with how things play out if one or another doesn't happen. So just to kind of reiterate, it's not because one market blocks, then obviously it feels because of that. It's the terms of the contract, just to confirm, between Blizzard, Activision, and Microsoft for the purpose of the deal completing, that they have said.
Yeah.
One of the terms is that everyone approves this, and then we will complete between each other. So it's their own set terms. It's not the governments that have set these terms. They've said to each other, part of our agreement in order to complete is that we get approval from everybody first, and if we don't get approval, that is the end of it. Essentially, that is essentially the be all end all, isn't it?
Yeah, essentially that's kind of the first answer to that, which is exactly as you described, that none of us have seen the merger agreement in writing, right? But in the SEC filings, Activision do describe it in that manner. They say these are conditions, and that if they don't get the approvals, that may just sink the deal. That may is a light word, because what they actually mean is it will. But obviously, you don't want to worry shareholders when you're talking about that, right? Because you want them to approve it. So yeah, that's the one. And then, I guess in a scenario, if you want me to elaborate, but in a scenario, let's just imagine that didn't exist, or that somehow they got around it, right? And the CMA blocks, but everywhere it says, yeah, we're fine, go ahead. Even in that scenario, I think it's unlikely that Microsoft would proceed with it, because the fact is that, first of all, the CMA can fine you a pretty large amount of money. I think it's 5% of your global combined turnover. So it's a huge, like, that may not sound like much, but when you're talking about Microsoft and Activision's global turnover, right, that's an enormous amount of money.
Yeah, billions on top of it.
Yeah, it's billions. Yeah. So there's that. I've heard some people suggest that maybe they just pull out of the UK market. It's never going to happen. It's not a realistic answer because, you know, gaming market UK, top 10 biggest in the world. Call of Duty is massive, you know, massive Xbox fan base. They have various contracts in, you know, government, you know, across the entire tech space in the UK. Never going to happen. Directors obviously will, you know, have Microsoft have a fiduciary duty to shareholders. Pulling out of the deal, pulling out the UK market, it's not good for the company at all. It hugely damages their brand reputation, their commercial reputation, their business reputation. Like, it's just not a realistic suggestion that they would ever do that. So I think even if they got past the contractual bit and the CMA said, we're still going to, you know, we're going to block this, or we want to block this, and Microsoft said, we're just going to ignore you, they wouldn't get very far. It's not worth it. It's not worth it to them.
I would say a final point as well, because of course there's a lot of people hearing this. Obviously, it sounds uber serious, but as you reiterated before as well, Luke, like, this is standard procedure for a deal of this size anyway. So it's always going to go through phase 2. These are like worst case scenarios we're speaking about here. It's not like this is definitely going to happen. But in your experience, based on the knowledge that you have there, do you foresee this personally getting blocked, or do you foresee this having remedies?
Oh, see, if I could answer that question, I'd be
in your personal opinion, as opposed to kind of from their perspective.
In my personal opinion, I think it's more likely than not that they will get it through the CMA. Whether that's with remedies or not, I don't know.
Yeah.
But I think they've got a strong kind of case, if you will. I don't mean to make it adversarial again, but you know, they have strong arguments with this stuff. The phase 2 panel is a different panel, you know, than phase 1. It's a more senior panel.
Are they a more investigative panel as opposed to phase 1?
I wouldn't say more investigative, but they are far. They're more experienced, right? As in, they tend to be. It's quite hard to get on a CMA panel, but they tend to be very, very, very highly educated. Usually from different fields, so economics or law, for example, finance, that sort of stuff, and they kind of direct the review. Obviously, there are lots of people working underneath them to gather evidence and help assist, you know, and to kind of give them a report to read through. But they're actively involved in that, so they are. You know, I think the important point to note is that they're different, right? They're different. They're very experienced. They're kind of the cream of the crop of the CMA, as it were. There's only about 30 panel members, and I think there's about 5 on this one, for example. So they're really, really intelligent. So they will take a kind of scrutinous eye to this, as they're supposed to do, but they are open to debate. You know, they're open to ideas that Microsoft
and that's where Rima Alali would come in, right? She's obviously spearheading this defense, so to speak, for Microsoft. Yep. That's where she would come in, and I guess she would. They would have discussions. I'm not gonna say arguments, because they're not arguing here. They're literally having discussions regarding pushing this through versus not pushing it through.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, in phase 2, they'll usually that panel will actually go to the merging parties, like local headquarters, to have a meeting. They usually get a presentation by, in this case, Microsoft, And they even get a tour sometimes, which is nice for them. I don't know why it's relevant to a competition review,
That's
but
nice of them.
that happens.
That's nice.
Nice of them, and Microsoft London campus is really nice, so they might be persuaded by the coffee there. I don't know, but so they get that, and as they get a presentation and they get to talk, and as you say, Remy Lally will be there, who is a really intelligent woman herself, really fantastic.
I've heard
lawyer,
only great things about her. Yeah, absolutely. Her intelligence is off the chart.
Yeah, so she's not a magic wand.
Right, she's not a magician,
means,
right?
but she's like the type of lawyer you would definitely want. She's got vast experience in this stuff. Now, obviously, she has a vested interest because Microsoft are her employer, right? But that everybody knows that. But she, will be there. I would imagine Phil will probably fly over to do that, to be in that meeting as well. I think it would probably be that important to him that he'd be there. Certainly she would. And then they would bring in their counsel, i.e. the lawyers they've hired externally, Weil Gottschall in this instance, to also help. So it's an all hands on deck approach. But yeah, look, overall, do I think it will pass? I was more confident towards the start of this than I am now. I will say that. I said before, phase 2 is not a good place to be. But as you've seen today with the London Stock Exchange one, it doesn't mean that your deal's dead because it goes to phase 2. The CMA might do an about turn, right? Or they might come to some analysis that's much more favorable. So I think there's reasons to be optimistic. Clearly, Microsoft are concerned because, you can tell from what they're doing that they're concerned, by all the public-facing statements they're making and all like the.
Now, does any other public? I'm glad you brought that up because that's actually going to be a question that I ask next. And Crispy, we'll get to you and of course Rebit momentarily. What Microsoft did by creating the website and coming out there and being forward-facing and transparent in a lot of the ways that they are doing things, I think that it's going to help. But again, that's just my personal opinion. I do have a small question. When the CMA Phase 2 takes a look at this deal, right?
Yeah.
Do they actually look at what this deal does for the human element of gaming, meaning that the actual people that work at Activision Blizzard, meaning that, we know that for years they were under Bobby Kotick, who's considered to be the devil. Like the guy he's an awful person. We know that he's going to be given a golden parachute when he leaves. He's not going to be a part of Microsoft when this deal ultimately gets done. We do know that Microsoft has agreed to have unions come into gaming for the first time in gaming history, right? All of the people that are currently working for Activision specifically and Blizzard in some aspect took a big sigh of relief when Microsoft announced they were going to purchase this. Microsoft, Activision said that if this deal doesn't go through, we know that their stock is going to tank. It's going to drop. It's going to drop faster than a brick in water, which means that they're going to have to potentially lay off thousands upon thousands of employees. Does the CMA and any of these governmental institutions take that into account?
So I guess on the employee one, the CMA do not look at that. I don't think many other regulators do either, because all they're looking at is competition and ultimately how that will affect consumers, not other interested stakeholders. So they don't. I know in the US, for example, I think Elizabeth Warren and maybe a couple of others wrote to the FTC/DOJ and said that they should in the future look to the interests of employees as well, because obviously they're a really important stakeholder in all of this in some sense. So maybe that will change in the US, but certainly in the UK, no. The CMA don't look at that. And then I guess, in terms of impact of the company, Activision, if the deal doesn't go through, do the CMA look at that? They do, because one thing they have to analyze is what they call the counterfactual, which is basically what happens if we, what happens essentially if we don't let this go through, right? So if we block it, what happens then? The counterfactual is kind of analysis of current, the current market as it is, and then what might happen if the CMA block it and try and keep things as a status quo in some sense. So they would look at that. They wouldn't particularly care if Activision's stock prices drop, which they probably would. I don't think it would be catastrophic, but certainly would. So yeah, they have some look at that sort of stuff, but again, it's not, because really, like, it's not. That's not a regulator's fault, if that makes any sense. Like,
Right.
Two companies have come together and decided they want to merge. Fine. But then they have to bear the repercussions of that as to what that means amongst competition regulators and what the impacts will be if this doesn't happen and what the impacts will be if it does. Right. So all a competition regulator can do is go, right, okay, this falls within our jurisdiction, this falls within the laws of competition in our jurisdiction or of antitrust. We have to analyze it. That's our duty. And then whatever happens out of that is really is what it is.
Okay. I mean, the perfectly said. Crispy, you have any questions or a specific question you'd like to ask Luke about the deal?
I don't know. You kind of beat it around the bush and answered my question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. There's been a lot of other regulatory bodies that have come out and spoke against the CMA. Now, I know you're probably going to say legally that has no bearing, but I mean, I feel like because they're two U.S. companies and because, if you look at the analytics of it, it's not logical to be using the leader of that particular space as your example of an issue. Do you feel like if this continues to happen, where there's these other regulators or even governing bodies, parts of the United States government that have something to say about this, and they continue to say something, do you think that will have an effect on their decision?
It's a good question. I think so. I think I don't know if there's any regulators that have come out and particularly taken issue with the CMA.
Well,
I know
they regulate certain aspects of like markets and stuff like that, but they're not. And this is like a worldwide type thing. Like, they're independent, but I can't remember their name.
Yeah, there were a couple in the US, weren't they? Which were, I think, business related.
Yeah, they're funded
like
by businesses.
Yeah, that's the one. Yeah, so there are a couple there. I think this week or maybe the last 2 weeks.
I think what Crispy's alluding to is first off the Chamber of Commerce and also some verbiage in the Brazil response that kind of alluded to, hey, we're here for competition and not necessarily one versus another, which people maybe rightly or wrongly have ascribed to, hey, they're talking about the CMA there. I think that's what he may be discussing.
Yeah.
Correct me if I'm wrong, Crispy.
There was one other one. I can't remember. I believe it's a global. It's like a global business.
Was it that? It was that information technology.
Yes,
one.
the IT something or other. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like, as we're going about it, like that's just a few. You know what I mean? And a lot of people say chambers. Oh, that's not. But they are made up of like senators and like, people in the business world and stuff like that. Like there's a lot going on with that when they speak up, which I haven't seen them speak up in I'd say at least 10 years about something. And then the problem that I think they brought to light is that, the CMA is trying to govern two technically full-on American companies and what they're doing, and that bothers them. And that's not to say that, I don't see the FTC or anybody in the American side trying to govern anybody else's, mergers. And basically, if it's in that country, they're going to pass it if that country allows it. That's basically the way I've seen them act. You know what I mean? And yes, they will have companies that are interjecting between global market, and then you kind of let it play out. You know what I'm saying? So
Yeah.
like, like there's certain companies that have tried it and they've gotten blocked, but they're technically in 2 different markets. So like you just have to let it play out. So I feel like, this could be something that, as you look at the numbers themselves, and as people, with a mind like yourself who just say, like I'm in this aspect, like what's going on here? Like, why is this happening? Because it doesn't make sense. There's going to be people like us that are kind of like, I don't understand the whole lawyer. But those people that are starting to speak up, they definitely have a knowledge in that. And that's where I go and say, I understand legally, like they can't say that. But I mean, I feel like it could pose some influence on that. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I mean, I'd be really wary of, and this is like no offense to those bodies, like some of the bodies we mentioned, but like they are ultimately advocates for US business. So of course they're not going to want a regulator external to the US to look at it. They're kind of lobbying bodies, right? So it would be the same in the UK if our business lobbying bodies, if let's say 2 UK companies wanted to merge and the EU had a look at the deal, right, and were skeptical of it. So will those be influential to the CMA? No, they won't, being honest. Like they're not gonna do anything because they are not. I mean, even if they were government bodies, of the US, then it's tough luck, right? As in, the CMA have jurisdiction to review mergers that have a particular UK impact. If you're 2 US companies and your merger has a particular UK impact that meets the thresholds under UK law, which are pretty high, by the way, like they're, it's not like small businesses, right? It's big, huge mergers. If that is the case, then unfortunately for your merger, it's going to have to go through the UK regulatory process in much the same way as if it touches on the EU regulations about this because of its particular size relative to the EU, it has to go through that procedure as well. That's just the nature of huge mergers that are global in nature, where businesses are have touch points and touchstones in major jurisdictions other than the US, even if they may be US companies. So if there were 2 UK companies that touch the I think it's the Sherman Act in America for some reason, then rightly, then the FTC/DOJ would have to look at that as well, and they might have a particularly dim view of it on the US market. These entities are trying to protect consumers in their markets, right?
In their regions, correct.
In their regions, yeah, that's the point. I know people don't think the CMA is doing that because of the way that they describe
their wording
their
wasn't
analysis.
good, especially in phase 1.
Their wording is, and I foresaw this before it even came out. Like in my head, I was like, if they do what they usually do in terms of how they describe competition effects, then people are going to think that there's some inherent issue with this, because the way that the CMA, when they're evaluating does it have an impact on consumers, the way they do that is to say, okay, well, if it can only have an impact on consumers if it has an impact on competition. What's competition? It's rivalry between different market participants. The only way you assess competition is by reference to those participants. And the only way you really assess it is by looking at who's the leader in the sector, right? So Sony were always going to be like a kind of focal point for the CMA to say, here's the leader, like here's the big, like one of the biggest participants. Microsoft are also one of the biggest participants in this particular market, right, with Nintendo, and then there are lots of other publishers, developers, etc. How will this interplay down the line with that rivalry? Will it affect the rivalry in such a detrimental manner that ultimately that would be bad for consumers? But if you go and look at the CMA's other cases, where they have different sectors, like they do this in like pharmaceutical stuff, right? They'll, assess pharmaceutical mergers by reference to Pfizer or some other leader in that space, because that's just the way they do it. Even though I know it looks like Jim Ryan's, driven like a truck of PlayStation 5s and early copies of God of War Ragnarok to the CMA store and gone, here you go, benefit the deal. But yeah, so that's what they do. But I mean, like, I don't think those bodies will influence the deal at all. And even if a government came out and said, X, Y, or Z, from the US or from anywhere else, again, it wouldn't impact them because they have no authority in relation to the.
Well, they're also not there looking out for the U.S. regulators are looking out for.
They're looking out for them.
Consumers, correct?
Yeah, rightly.
Whereas the CMA is looking out for consumers. Now, just out of curiosity, it looks as if, from what I understand, and we'll get to 3-bit in a second, that the EU is going to levy their decision first before the CMA. And I believe that right after that, or in the month of the middle month of November, which is next month, the FTC is going to they don't pass the deal. They simply don't oppose the deal. Yeah. What if these two giant entities say, yeah, listen, no concessions. We don't see a problem with it. Sony is going to be fine. They've been a market leader for 20 years. They continue to be the console market leader. This is not going to Microsoft's already said they're going to keep Call of Duty everywhere like Minecraft. We don't see a problem with it. Would the CMA be inclined to levy a decision that's the same?
Yeah, it's difficult to know, I think. I think the EU are just in their phase 1 at the moment. So right. I think in November they'll say if they take it to a phase 2. Now, brace yourselves here because I expect that they will take it to phase 2. I'd be really surprised if they didn't.
Okay.
Again, that doesn't mean that they, are being paid in DualSense controllers, but it does mean that they have.
No, it just means that they want a more investigative look into it.
Exactly.
Through the second phase.
Exactly. They have the EU has a very similar merger regime to the UK, so it's very similar tests. So that probably will go to phase 2. In the circumstances where, for example, the EU and the FTC, the FTC don't come to a decision, but you know what I mean. They come to the same.
They don't
conclusion.
block it. They don't go to
they don't block
sue
it.
Microsoft to block it. Right.
Exactly. And the CMA, kind of the last man standing, and they're looking at it. Then there is a big sort of information sharing protocol across these regulators, right? And they do talk to each other and they're involved with each other, particularly obviously where there is a deal like this one which crosses over all these jurisdictions. So it may influence us, because they may speak to the EU and FTC and say, okay, well, what, you've had access to the same data as we have, what's the rationale for you coming to the conclusions you have? And that could influence, it could influence the CMA. The difficulty is, I think it's unlikely you'll get the EU having made its decision before the CMA
because they're only
provisional final.
Okay, I thought they were further along.
Yeah. So, and I think the FTC they're supposed to say something if they want to say something in November, but I think they can even extend that by a certain amount of time. So again, defer to Hogue Law on all US matters. But So it's a bit in flux, and also the CMA will probably put out their provisional decision in January. So they put out a provisional report to say we think that we'll basically we've arrived at this conclusion, and then there can be responses to that and discussions, and then by the end of March, that's when they have to put out a final report and say this is what we actually this is what we think. Either pass it or block it, ask for remedies, whatever.
Interesting. All right. Well, listen, let's get 3-bit into the conversation. 3-bit, you have a question you wanna levy for Luke regarding the ABK merger?
Yeah, I would love for him to expand on in the hypothetical case of it's blocked. What grounds is Microsoft protected with the CMA? I know you kind of talked about it with the FTC. Microsoft can get a bunch of different lawyers involved and things like that. But with the CMA, can you kind of go into that a little bit more, what Microsoft could do if it was hypothetically blocked?
Yeah, I touched on this earlier, but kind of briefly, they can appeal to a tribunal in the UK called the Competition Appeals Tribunal. They can only apply on certain grounds, so they can't challenge the basis of the CMA's decision. You know, they can't say we don't agree with the decision, therefore we're challenging it. It has to be on like a procedural ground, effectively. They've done something wrong in their analysis or the way that they've conducted the case. So they can do that. Beyond that, you can't really do much in the UK. The appeals tribunal can't overturn the CMA's decision either. It can only just essentially refer it back to the CMA.
And because of how the deal, I guess, is structured, you saying that like, for the most part, if any, I guess, regulator were to not approve the deal, then the primary deal as a whole is kind of shut down. Do you ever see a scenario where it's approved everywhere, but let's just say it's hypothetically it's approved everywhere except the CMA? Do you see a scenario where Microsoft can, what Microsoft would do in that situation? Or would they just cancel the deal? Or
I think, given, I think they just couldn't complete it under the merger agreement if it's a CMA. Now, if I don't know, Saudi Arabia had come out and said we're blocking the deal, not that Saudi Arabia would ever do that, but if they did, then they kind of seemingly fall under this relevant regulatory authority in the merger agreement. So they're not named the Saudi Arabian Competition Authority. The CMA, the EU, and the US are. So they're clearly very important. But if Saudi Arabia came out and blocked it, like let's say they were the only one standing, I think there'd probably fail safes in the agreement for Microsoft to say, we don't care. Like, we don't care about that market too much. So we're just going to proceed and we'll just take whatever the backlash is. For the CMA and the EU and the FTC/DOJ, it's so fundamental to the agreement, seemingly, that if one of those blocks it, then that's pretty much it. Like, provided they block it and then you try and exhaust all your options with that jurisdiction, and you don't get anywhere, that's it.
Well, listen, this has been one hell of an hour and 15 worth of this show. Luke, I can't thank you enough for answering all the questions. Obviously, you're going to hang around while we get into what Phil Spencer had to say. But ladies and gentlemen, I want to welcome in the 520 people that are here for the new episode of Primetime Gaming. Obviously, if you are someone that's finding the channel for the first time, I would ask that you consider subscribing. We are on the hunt for 12K, and we are just a little over 600 subscribers away from doing so. And listen, I don't know if we hit that in 2022, but it would be damn nice to do so. But I do want to get into, of course, what happened today. Now, Phil Spencer, head of Microsoft Gaming, was out making some rounds, and he was, of course, talking a lot about Activision Blizzard King. This information comes to us from Tom Warren. Now, Tom Warren, if you don't know, is a reporter for The Verge. He's someone that is constantly out here. He's a senior editor, more specifically, at TheVerge.com, and he covers everything from PC all the way through every piece of hardware. He put out a lot of tweets today regarding
I think Boom is.
I think we lost. I think we lost Boom.
Leader. Yes, sir.
that guy. I actually hit sorry.
Oh, he's back. There we go.
That's sorry about that. Let me just move the screen. That was me. I hit the back button. I was going through my tabs, and I accidentally hit the other one. I'll get to gameplay back in a second, but let me pull up some of the Tom Warren tweets here, folks, that has a lot of people talking, and specifically what Microsoft, head of Microsoft Gaming, Phil Spencer, had to say. And, one of the things that came up that kind of took a lot of people by storm, Luke, is the fact that He has once again put out there not only to numerous entities, governmental entities regarding Call of Duty, but he actually said it again. Call of Duty is going to be treated like Minecraft. Now, we know Minecraft currently is available here, there, and everywhere. I mean, heck, you can play Minecraft on your refrigerator if you have a screen, and it appears that Microsoft, and again, this might be, Microsoft or head of Microsoft Gaming doing the rounds, kind of letting the transparency of what this deal means for Microsoft, for regulators potentially to move in their decision to pass it or push it through. I know that Jim Ryan has been out here banging the drum. As a matter of fact, they're the only entity to oppose this deal. I know there's some people that are saying that Google is now, siding with Sony, but I don't necessarily know how true that is, because I haven't seen anything from Google since Stadia was killed, and we know that Google killed it themselves. I mean, they have a whole website dedicated to, it's called the Graveyard of Google, of things that they start and they never finish. But Jim Ryan, head of PlayStation, has been out there talking about how the removal of Call of Duty would be to the detriment of all of Sony. They would be out of business. There's been some talk about the market being closed by fence, and then somehow Sony, the market leader for 20 years, would die. We also have a report from VGC where currently the market leader in regards to console sales is the Nintendo Switch for this generation. They have 43% of the market. But know what's interesting, Luke? They don't have Call of Duty. They have their own shooter that they made from scratch called Splatoon. Happens to be the hottest game since sliced bread. But when you see Phil Spencer out there talking about, they're basically taking interviews with anyone that will have them. And specifically, this interview with The Verge talked about how they intend to not only keep Call of Duty on PlayStation, what seems like forever, they're going to bring it to the Nintendo Switch. They want Call of Duty on more screens than it's ever had before. And the last time a Nintendo console, Luke, had a Call of Duty was the Wii U. And that is what seems like decades ago. What are your thoughts on Phil Spencer out here talking about they're gonna treat Call of Duty like Minecraft?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, my first thought is that I don't want to be the developer making a Call of Duty for Nintendo Switch. Like that sounds like hell trying to do that. But and I would not be playing that version. But if they did, I think that's really interesting, and it doesn't surprise me. I mean, Call of Duty is in that bracket of such a ubiquitous worldwide game, like Minecraft is, right? So influential in the gaming sphere that why wouldn't Microsoft want to exploit it everywhere they possibly could, including PlayStation, obviously, and they've continued to commit to that. But also the Switch stuff was, Nintendo platform stuff was really interesting because it shows that they actually, I think it's probably the first time, Phil's actually come out and talked about Call of Duty in relation to Switch. He said that he wants Call of Duty to reach, even more gamers before, but he's never actually explicitly mentioned a Nintendo platform in relation to that. So I thought that was really interesting. And it's he's doing his his tour at the moment, as you say, like to try and get out there and look good, and look trying to assuage some of the fears of regulators like the CMA, specifically vis-a-vis Call of Duty. So yeah, I mean, it makes sense though, right? I mean, the amount of money that Call of Duty makes anyway, you could make even more money if you bring it to more platforms and enable people to access it in different ways and exploit the IP more than just, a yearly franchise and Warzone, try and introduce, different types of games, for example, with that moniker. So, Yeah, it doesn't surprise me at all. I think it's a good look for Microsoft, right? It's a good look for Phil as well.
I mean, yeah, it's a good look, but I think it's an honest look. Like they actually said in their response to the CMA that it does not make financial sense to remove Call of Duty from the revenue source out of Sony is just much more than anyone else. So we know that it's making a ton of money over there. You know what? I find it very interesting. I want to get your opinion on this. You know, the original response from Jim Ryan was that if Call of Duty is removed from PlayStation, it's going to be disastrous for the brand. The brand is going to go out of business. They don't have any studios that could respond, which is, that kind of sucks if you're a PlayStation studio, because you're saying basically we can't match what they do over at Call of Duty. But okay, he's gotta say what he's got to say for his shareholders and to try and block this deal. But what I found interesting, Luke, was the response after Microsoft said, "Hey, listen, we're going to keep it there." His response was like, "Well, even if it stays multi-plat, we still have a problem with it because they have Game Pass and we don't have Game Pass." Well, they do. They have their own version of Game Pass now. It's their decision not to put day-and-date games on there. That's really a Sony problem, not a Microsoft problem. What are your thoughts on that? Then they shifted from, we have to have Call of Duty, to, okay, well, we're going to keep Call of Duty, but it's still a problem because you have Game Pass and we don't.
Yeah, I think this is probably something the CMA talked about as well, which is that the worry, the potential with Microsoft having Call of Duty is that, okay, they wouldn't make it exclusive, but they would foreclose access to it in some other way, or kind of reverse foreclose the game by, for example, bringing it to Game Pass, but not bringing it to a PlayStation service or an equivalent service on PC or whatever. So, it is what it is. Like, Microsoft want to exploit Call of Duty in ways that are beneficial to them. They would obviously want to bring it to Game Pass if the deal goes through. Obviously, they seemingly can't because of the marketing contract. At least for the next few years, anyway.
So at least 2024, from what we understand, is when the current contract expires. And Microsoft even offered to extend that to 2027. It's just that they wouldn't have marketing rights anymore, which makes sense because they don't own the IP.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, because why would Microsoft give up that benefit, right? So, look, Sony are going to have issues with this. Of course they are. It's not surprising. Call of Duty is obviously a very important third-party franchise to them, probably the most important third-party franchise to them. It's a big source of revenue. They don't want anything that could, it's not just about the revenue of that game, I think, for Sony. It's clearly about the connection, the connotation it has with PlayStation. That's what's really important to them, because that's the point of their marketing, right? Is to connect the game to PlayStation so that people associate it with PlayStation, and therefore they kind of stick to that platform and aren't moved away, because obviously if you get a Call of Duty game in, then they're going to spend money elsewhere, right? So that's probably the main thing that they're worried about. But as you say, Microsoft are going to want to do all the things that you would imagine Microsoft are going to want to do with the game if the acquisition goes through. I don't know if I kind of agree with the idea that Sony couldn't build an equivalent game, not because I don't think they could build a game of that quality, because there are lots of developers on the Microsoft and Sony side, given the time, that could build a game that's very good. But the problem with Call of Duty is, like Minecraft or others, it's the brand name. You can't just build 15 years of brand name, right? You can't just come up with that from scratch. So that's the only kind of argument that I like have favorable views towards, in terms of when people talk about the impact it will have on Sony. Because otherwise, with what Microsoft is saying, I don't think it will have that great of an impact. Yes, people will maybe some people will come away from the PlayStation platform because it'll be available on Game Pass, but I don't think people are going to come in like, millions of players of droves and just switch platform. That's not how people work, right? That's not how gamers work. So, it's an interesting question.
Very, very, very interesting. You know what? Let's bring in Mag on the
Yes, sir.
conversation. Because I know that you got to go at 9 at a hard. You got a hard out at 9. But here's my question to you.
Yes.
Luke's making great points. And Sony, their argument. I think that their argument is weak sauce because they make some of the greatest games. The bangers, as the kids say.
Right.
They're constantly making. Where do you personally feel, and how they could personally respond to them Call of Duty not being in their service, whereas it would be in Microsoft service, because they have done things. Final Fantasy VII, perfect example. Where can you play that? Well, you can play that, on exclusively on PlayStation 4 and 5, but you can't play that on Xbox. They have done many, many things that a lot of Xbox gamers are left holding the bag. Xbox gamers then are forced to have to buy a PlayStation if they want to play, specific games. I don't see anything different than what Microsoft is doing. Why does Sony have a problem with this if that's what they have built their entire generation on?
Here's the interesting thing. Now that you mention that, I don't think they have, and the reason why I'm saying that, I don't think they've built their legacy on that. They've utilized those games, first party games, as weapons. They've weaponized those games as tools. If you look at the sales numbers of those games, all those first party games, and even the third party exclusives, they're not doing anything. It's not moving the needle financially. I mean, 10 million, 15 million, that's peanuts compared to what a game like Call of Duty does or anything like that. Now, here's the thing. They are obviously trying to combat in one way or another, even before this deal came to fruition, when they were talking about that they have like half a dozen games as a service, games in development right now on top of purchasing
they actually
Bungie.
They have 12.
Oh, Jesus H. Christ. I didn't know it was that many. I thought it was half
12.
a dozen. Okay, so you've got all of that, plus they purchased Bungie for, what is it, $3 billion?
3.6.
So, 3.6. So they're obviously working on something that they could utilize engagement. That's the big name that we have to use, the word they have to use for the day, is that what Call of Duty brings that like God of War does not bring is engagement on a regular basis, right? Call of Duty or God of War, when it comes out, I've already bought it, right? So it's sitting there. I've made the purchase. That's it. The money ends there. Whereas Call of Duty and Fortnite, and let's not forget, guys, and that is not just Call of Duty. You got the Apex Legends and the Fortnites and the Call of Duties and the War Zones and whatever else, right? That is where PlayStation made their bread and butter. Everything else was based off of reputation. Their biggest selling game, or a first-party game, was what? Spider-Man, and that was only like 20-something million. That's nothing. Call of Duty's going to make that in 2 days. You see what I'm saying? So that is the concern there. And the concern is, let's not forget, microtransactions, season purchases, all these different things. What the hell is it? The season passes, right? Skins, all kinds of things. You can go play as Rambo in the war zone or whatever you want to do, right? They all cost money, just like Fortnite. You can buy all the different games. By the way, they have Ash in Fortnite right now with the chainsaw attached to his arm. So I got to get it. I mean, even though I don't play Fortnite, I just need it. But anyways, the point is that's where they make their money. And you see, I just made my point right now. Fortnite just made $15 off of me. And I haven't, you know what I mean? And I barely play the damn thing. But that's what they're going to be missing if the game wasn't on there. But however, the game will be on there. The bigger problem is they're going to worry about the engagement numbers on the PlayStation because let's face it, in the end, $15 a month, $15, let's say, is better than paying $105. Right? I just paid $105 for the Call of Duty because they're charging the same price as the PlayStation 5 exclusive games. So here in Canada, and I'm sure in most parts of the of Europe and the UK and, of course, Australia, we're paying well over $70. All right, at least the equivalent of. So right here in Canada, like I said, $105 for Call of Duty. Is it better than that, or you're 15? Now, at the end of the day, though, the interesting thing is that, you know, it's just like a casino. If you think about it that way, a hardcore Call of Duty player, let's say they're playing on Xbox, okay? They move to Xbox and they're paying the $50, and they're not playing any other game except for that. In 6 months, Microsoft still made their $100 off you. You know what I mean? So they're still making the money. You know, to quote De Niro in Casino himself, in the end, we get it all. So it doesn't really make a difference. They're still going to make it from you. It's just going to take 6 months to do so. So consider it like a video game version of layaway. Okay, or a video game version of financing the game so that you're not paying $100 up front, but in the end, they're still going to get that $100, right? The only difference is you have access to like 500 plus other games that you could play as well. So it's not just that one game, but I'm just putting that into perspective. Now, the interesting thing is when it comes to what you mentioned earlier, I just want to dip on this for a second here, is that you were talking about how keeping the game multiplat and then bringing it to Nintendo. Why the hell not? First of all, I've been saying it from the beginning. To quote another one of my favorite movies, how could you be so obtuse to keep it like exclusive to Xbox? It's silly. Let PlayStation have it. Charge them full price. Just charge them the same price that they're charging now. Nintendo, maybe like $10 less, because obviously it's not going to be the same quality. However, if you think about this, the quality doesn't necessarily have to be there when it comes to Call of Duty, and I'll tell you why. Because right now, 88 million people are playing Call of Duty mobile.
Yeah.
Can we please put that in perspective for a second? It's not a bad game. I played it on my phone. It's kind of fun. I just tried it out for a little bit, and I'm like, this is actually pretty damn good. And it's actually you can actually use a controller now, like an actual Xbox. I don't know if you can use PlayStation, but you could use an Xbox controller to play the game. It's supported. And the game is really buttery smooth. It's not the greatest graphics on earth, but you know what I mean? It's slightly better than like MetaQuest. Okay. By the way, I still hate saying MetaQuest. It's still always going to be Oculus. But anyways, the point is 88 million people are playing Call of Duty Mobile. Those are numbers that they're not going to ignore, because those same people will play it on the Switch for slightly better experience, right? My kids will play it, or maybe my son, maybe not my daughter, but certainly my son will play it on his Switch. Why the hell not? It's right there. So the thing is, when Phil said 5 years ago that he wants to open up the market to 2 billion players and everybody laughed except for Phil, that's one of the reasons why, right? Because you're thinking about something like Call of Duty, and when Activision came and approached them, they were like, hey guys, remember when we were talking about 2 billion? Here's 2 billion in one package. When you put in King, Call of Duty on all consoles and all platforms and PC, you have the mobile market with the King and everything else. I don't want to get into all that, but just the point is that it's going to be there. And the last thing I was going to talk about is that, you know, when you're talking about Phil going out there, doing interviews, all this kind of thing, this is all part of the game, right? This is all part of the game, because you have to put that PR face on. You got to be there. You got to be personable. You can't just be a faceless corporation, putting something forward to the CMA, for example, which obviously is the main focus right now. It's happening to me at work. Okay, I got caught up because I got a lot of people I've been hiring, a lot of people I've been bringing into my team from all levels, from executive all the way down to just people working minimum wage jobs. I've been getting all these people in there and building a hell of a strong team for myself and for the corporation at large. So therefore, I haven't been making my face very public because I've been really busy. And funny enough, tomorrow I got to do a town hall meeting with everybody, because it's like, you need to put your face out there more, because people want to see that you're there. It brings confidence. And that's something that I have to do tomorrow. You don't think Phil's doing the exact same thing? That's exactly what's happening. All right. And so he's doing all these things. And the last thing before I pass off the mic, and then I run to the hills eventually, is that I was going to say the one thing about the price increase, because I'm trying to squeeze this all into the one sentence here. Sorry, guys. This price increase, okay, of Game Pass, which was what Phil was talking about in the interview. Although he didn't really come out and talk about it, he just said prices will raise on certain things. I think there was a lot of speculation as to what it was specifically. Game Pass, sure, could be one of them. How is this a surprise to anybody? When you start putting in quality titles, you start putting in massive, oh my goodness, I can't even think of the damn word. But anyways, the point is you're putting all these things into the service. Obviously, it's going to cost more money to run. Obviously, they're going to charge a little bit more, because you're going to be getting more of a premium experience. Investment. Sorry, my God. I couldn't think of the damn word for a second. When you're putting a $70 billion investment in there, you're going to be getting quality on top of quality. Okay.
Yeah.
So it's just, you're obviously going to charge them. Maybe it's $1. Okay. But let's say Call of Duty goes through or ABK goes through and you get Call of Duty in there. And all of a sudden Game Pass over the course of the next 2 or 3 years goes up to 100 million subscribers. Remember we talked about that a long time ago, that they all have a magic number. When they hit a magic number, what ends up happening is that then they'll raise the price. But until then, they'll keep the price the way it is. Same with Disney. They did the same thing. Netflix does the same thing. They all have a magic number. When Disney Plus hits 100 million, they're going to raise it another $1. When it hits 120, they're going to raise it another $1. This is how they operate. This is how they move forward. Game Pass is not going to be any different. Now, the other thing is, and the last thing I'm going to say is that God help anybody from one of those toxic communities who are going to complain about that. These are the same clowns who defended Sony saying, well, it's because of inflation. They need to make their money back. So God help them if they may. Oh, my God, the amount of videos I'll make over that. But I'll tell you something. If they complain about that, that's going to be hell of a hypocritical situation. But yeah, I mean, everybody's raising the prices. Everybody's bringing it. The cost of productions are going up. And on top of it, you're getting more value out of it. So why the heck wouldn't you? You know what I mean? It's going to go up. That's just the way it's going to be. Eggs cost double what they cost last year, for crying out loud. Okay, so like
a carton of eggs here in New Rochelle, New York is $5, which is freaking ridiculous.
Okay, so that's just putting it in perspective. But anyways, there you go. I just gave you 5 topics in like one long run on.
Good stuff is all absolutely good stuff. Listen, let's bring in Kay Asante into the conversation. Kay Asante, I don't know which part of Phil's comments do you want to cover. But I think the one that a lot of people are talking about in the chat, and we still have over 500 people here, is the potential price increase for Game Pass.
Okay. No, it's good that you bring that up, because I will have an unpopular opinion, and I'm sure my opinion is unpopular, but I have to say this. So just like back when Sony was coming out and we heard rumors of prices being raised, and they gave us economic factors and they gave us all these reasons, and everybody was like, come on now, you guys can definitely do better than that. I have to, as the kids say, keep the same energy. Can Microsoft afford it? Yes, they can. So how do I feel about this whole price increase stuff? I kind of feel like we as a gaming community have been talking about it a little too much. I kind of feel like we have been too much on that train of, oh, well, it makes sense. When you have so much value for your dollar, it can only rise because we have been trained, right, by various institutions and places that, hey, when you have something that's valuable, the prices do increase. We've seen that happen in multiple instances, right? So when we see it here, we are not surprised. So it's no one is at fault or faulty for saying so. It's just, I kind of feel like I'm in this place where I kind of feel like we've said it one too many times, and they kind of went, yeah, we kind of agree with them. So it's almost a self-fulfilling prophecy at this point, where if they weren't planning on prices increasing, they're definitely planning on prices increasing now, because it's been said one too many times to say that, hey, it should increase and it'll be valuable because it's a value for dollar proposition. Again, with that said, I do think that it's, to a certain extent, raising its value, raising its price isn't necessarily the worst thing in the world. I mean, at the end of the day, we've already seen rumors of that family plan coming out, and they wouldn't then increase that price and change that presumed price before it actually releases. So ultimately, it should still work out in that $5 deal thing that's still kind of in the middle. Then again, they haven't officially announced it yet, so it could also be raised. Who knows? But is it a value for dollar? I do think it's still valuable, but at the end of the day, if we're going to give these companies smoke for increasing prices and saying, "Come on, guys, you can afford to give a little bit for your consumer base," I think if we can give that criticism to Sony, we can definitely leverage that against Microsoft, because they have higher overhead than Sony does, and they can take a far more pain from the market than any other company can. So
yeah, see that's where I would disagree with you, though, only because Sony is charging $18 and they don't offer day and date.
Oh no, no. Don't get me wrong. I completely agree with you that Sony's method is Sony's method, they're basically using their political capital. They're using their ability. They have given so much to their consumers that now they can quote unquote do no wrong in their eyes, and as such, they're just raising prices and they're not afraid of it. I hear you on that, right? And they're not offering you value for your dollar as the competitor is. All I'm saying is, and I completely agree with you that absolutely Sony is not offering you as much value for your dollar, and you should be upset about that. I agree with you on that. All I'm saying though is, if we are going to give them smoke for raising prices and this and that, because they named a number of economic factors, and we said, oh, come on, guys, you are still the market leader. You still make a lot of profit off of this. Sure, there are economic factors that could lead to raising of prices, but we, the consumer, should not be okay with any of those excuses. If that is a righteous criticism to be levied at Sony, it is even more righteous to be levied at Microsoft. Because no matter how hard the economic factors are in the world, Microsoft can handle it more than most. So I don't disagree, and I don't say it's a bad thing, but
everybody's raising their prices. I'll get it. But look at Apple and Google and all these. They're raising prices like Christmas
Don't
Day.
say Apple to me. Don't say Apple to me, because on a Tuesday when it's a bright sunny day and the world is happy and everybody's giving free ice cream, Sony Apple will charge you $1 for that ice cream.
I know they will.
Yeah, they absolutely would, for sure. I mean, look, again, it really is an opinion based for me. When you look at what Sony does, the way that they nickel and dime their gamer is egregious.
Let's be clear here. This is not if and or this and that, right? Just like back in the day when Cyberpunk came out and it was horrible and it was removed from the Sony store, I didn't say if or that, this and that. In that same instance where I said both the game sucks and we need to talk about their return policy. In this instance, I say both. It makes sense that it can increase in value because there's value for dollar there. But we as consumers should not care what they say about it, because these companies can make a lot of money. I see you shaking your head there, Luke. You know what I'm talking about. Doesn't matter how much these people make. They can afford it. We should not be going, okay, we shouldn't be okay with that.
Yeah.
I'm not okay with it either. Sorry. I'm just saying it's an inevitability. But
it's an inevitability. Luke, of course. Please go ahead, Luke.
Yeah. No, I was going to say, I think there's look, if you compare Game Pass to PS Premium, right? I mean, there's no, in terms of, as everybody said, in terms of value, there's no competition whatsoever. But I think your point, K-Sensei, is that you're not trying to compare the two. You're trying to say, well, if one's justifying, raising its prices because of X economic factors, and everybody's mad about that, that's fair, and everybody should be mad about that, because as consumers, you shouldn't want to pay more. But you, as you say, you have to keep the same energy for, if Microsoft were to come out tomorrow and say, well, look, we're having to put up our console price and our game price and Game Pass price
factors, this and that.
Because economic factors,
$70 billion purchase player. Come on now.
Yeah, exactly. And it's definitely more justifiable if Microsoft do it, in the sense of the deal they're giving you in Game Pass is already really good value, but you still have to be like, well, come on, like, I'm a consumer, I don't care what, like, as you say, you're a massive company, right? $1 trillion company. You can bear the brunt of not increasing your prices. And to be fair to Phil, it was something that he said in the interview in reference to that. He said, we didn't want to raise them now because we don't think it's the right time to do that. So we're willing to kind of bear the costs. So maybe, they're looking at doing it when, the world comes out of a global economic recession, and then go, you know what, now's the time. Like, people can accept it now. They've got more disposable income. Obviously, when Sony did it, it was bad timing because everybody's already strapped for cash, right? So, yeah, I completely agree.
Not only was it bad timing, they also had a bad product that didn't give you enough that made you feel like it was worth the dollar you were spending. Absolutely, 100% right on that. Yeah, absolutely right on that. So that's me, Boob. I feel like, although I can justify it, half of my brain can go, I can see why it costs as much as it costs. But the other side of me goes, I don't care. I'm a consumer. It should be cheap. You or Microsoft, you can afford more money than anyone else. You should keep the prices as low as we want you to, because that's what you've built for us. That's what we've learned about you. You are there for the consumer. So continue doing the consumer's work. Keep prices low.
Listen, again, it's opinion. So let's get Wandering Dutch in on the conversation. Dutch, I mean, what of the many things that Phil Spencer had to say today jumped off the page for you?
Yeah, of course. We mentioned we've spoke about this many times actually with regards the Minecraft kind of comparisons and how they're going to approach Call of Duty. But obviously, it makes from both financial sense and as Luke kind of alluded to earlier, from a kind of a basic sensibility, it makes sense across the market. They want to get it in the hands of as many people as physically possible, because ultimately, financially, that is going to benefit them. But it's also going to get more users on their eyes. It's going to get more users onto their service. Of course, there is other concessions they can make. Of course, one of the things that was mentioned earlier as well was with regard to Sony's issue with Call of Duty and Game Pass ultimately, and the marketing rights, which is ultimately what this is the issue with, not having that marketing right, not having that association with Call of Duty is PlayStation, PlayStation is Call of Duty, which ultimately is the problem, and will remain the problem. The issue being, of course, and this is, I think, Luke alluded to this earlier as well, is, of course, Sony essentially saying, well, yeah, with the more PlayStation users, the more Call of Duty players we get on here, the more likelihood that they're going to spend money on our products. Now, of course, in terms of actually proving that would be nigh on impossible to associate. They would have to go through every Call of Duty purchases documents, essentially purchases on PlayStation, to prove that they are buying PlayStation like specific PlayStation first party content if they're on PlayStation. And the vast majority of PlayStation users are casual. The vast majority are casual players that literally just buy Call of Duty. They'll buy Call of Duty every year. They'll buy FIFA every year. They're your casual players essentially. Of course you get your hardcore minority, but the vast majority of that market is just on there and plays the Call of Duty. And when the next Call of Duty comes out, they'll play that. They might play the occasional racing game or your FIFAs or your sports games. But the likelihood that they'll actually be there specifically to buy first-party content on the back of Call of Duty is slim. So being able to prove that in a regulatory situation would be nigh on impossible for them to do so. So it would never get to that point. On another section for what Microsoft could do to approach that situation, if they're just feeling like, listen, we're going to put it on our aim entirely is to get Call of Duty to as many people as physically possible, give people different ways of accessing Call of Duty, whether it be mobile, whether it be Switch, whether it be Xbox, PC, PlayStation, wherever it is, we're going to give people the ability to play Call of Duty. Game Pass being one of those routes. What they essentially could do, and again, it's a slim possibility, but it's always a possibility because you never know with Microsoft, you never know with the deals that they could make, but they could essentially always, the possibility always remains that they could go to PlayStation and say, listen, if you've got such an issue with it going on Game Pass, we could make a deal where this also hits PlayStation Plus day one. Now that is always a possibility. They could make that deal. Whether or not PlayStation want to make that deal,
well, they'd have to pay through the nose to get that done, which that's business.
But if they offered them the opportunity to do so, they're still offering that opportunity for their user base to access that content on a subscription service as well as Game Pass. But the issue still remains, as Luke pointed out, is it's never been about Game Pass. It's never been about Call of Duty not being there. It's the association of Call of Duty with PlayStation. Now, of course, on the flip side, the Minecraft thing we've mentioned numerous times now, of course, both in the green room and I think on historic episodes as well. But it makes absolute sense to talk about it when we're talking about the Minecraft situation. Of course, Minecraft, when it first released, was PC only. It was on a really poor Java implementation. They moved that over to, of course, then the Xbox edition, the PlayStation edition, the Nintendo edition, and then they implemented all of them into the Java edition. So they're all kind of simultaneous and all work together. And then you had this just one app as opposed to many versions of it. So now you can essentially play Minecraft anywhere and everywhere, but that isn't where Microsoft stopped with that. Of course, with Minecraft Dungeons, we saw another version of the same franchise, but in a different section altogether, come to every platform. So it's on Nintendo, it's on PlayStation, it's on PC, it's on Xbox. We see the same with Minecraft Legends coming up next year. That is on every platform again. And the user base continues to grow. Of course, Minecraft's now on everything, including VR. That's exactly and people say, "Oh yeah, but it doesn't make sense for Microsoft to do this because it doesn't provide them benefit." It absolutely does. Like, you don't have to have every specific game as an exclusive if that particular game already has a market everywhere. It makes absolute sense if the market for that exclusivity is minimal. So, for instance, if you're looking at the likes of, and again, people might take this as the complete opposite end of the scale, but if you have a look at the likes of Elder Scrolls or the likes of Starfield, for instance, is an even easier one because that doesn't have a basis. Yes, the studio historically has provided multi-plat games, but Starfield being a new IP does not have a dedicated fan base on every platform just for that IP. So that one you can discount essentially. Yes, people love the work from that studio, and that's understandable. But that specific IP has no dedicated fan base that is
Right.
based on the actual game that's released. With the likes of Elder Scrolls and Fallout, etc., you could look at the wider market and say, listen, yes, Elder Scrolls has sold X million across the board. By not having it on another platform, we would lose maybe 5-6 million. To us, is that a negligible effect? Yeah, it's a negligible effect. In retrospect, putting that as an exclusive and putting it on Game Pass, that would actually provide more benefits than losing maybe 4 or 5 million and potentially saving a couple more that might already be multi-plat gamers. So they would already have multiple consoles, etc. Whereas with Call of Duty, you're talking about a franchise that has upwards of sort of 20, 30, 40 million, 50 million players worldwide. Even more if you include the mobile, which is what Mag was alluding to before. The mobile version of Call of Duty runs brilliantly, to be honest. I used to play it on touch controls, and it was buttery smooth. And that's the kind of version I'm expecting to see on Switch, to be in all honesty. And to be fair, that's fine. That version, if they can make that type of version for the Switch, I think it'd be fantastic. And when you're talking about the actual market as a whole for a Call of Duty, it makes absolute sense to keep it multi-plat from both a financial and logistical point of view. Not only that, but then broadening the market to Switch, bringing it to cloud on both mobile and PC and on your fridge freezer, wherever you want to play it. You're going to be able to play Call of Duty everywhere and expanding that market, not only just for the regular franchise. I think if we have a look at what they mean by Minecraft-esque, any new titles, any new deviations in the franchise for Call of Duty, that means everyone gets it. That's not to mean only mainline franchise stays on multiplat. If they're going to treat it like Minecraft, what that essentially means is that even if we create
Any version of it would be on every console. Yeah.
Even if we create a group like Minecraft Legends or like Minecraft Dungeons, who are wholly different to the regular Minecraft, if they create a brand new Call of Duty, that's also going to be everywhere, which means essentially no one is losing out. And then it boils down to the fact that essentially the only thing that PlayStation have an issue with at the end of the day, which the CMA and FTC and everybody else will not care about one iota, is the marketing rights. Because trying to preserve your own image to essentially present yourself as the only place to play isn't something you're doing to benefit the consumers.
That is correct.
As the whole wider market, that's not something any of these regulatory bodies are bothered about. They can understand things like Game Pass, because of course that provides a huge advantageous benefit to one platform over the other, because of course that user base can access that at a much lower buying cost versus the other. However, of course, what Microsoft have argued, of course, in these cases is PlayStation have that service available to them. They're not using it. but they do have that service. They have PlayStation Plus Premium. So essentially, it's treating it Minecraft is exactly the way we've been saying they're going to do things going forward for Call of Duty, and for literally specifically that franchise. Out of every one of the IPs on there, that is the only one that would make sense to do that with. The rest of them, it wouldn't matter one iota if that was exclusive or not. Literally, Call of Duty being multi-plat everywhere forever makes absolute sense because it is that much of a name. It is like we even when we talk about the likes of Diablo, yeah, Diablo's big, but Diablo's the biggest
It's not Call of
on
Duty
PC.
big. Right.
Yeah, but it's the biggest when it comes to PC specifically. Yes, there is a lot of console players for Diablo, but nowhere near the size of Diablo players on PC. Like Crash Bandicoot, etc. Of course, it's an iconic name, but if you have a look at the sales for Crash Bandicoot in recent years, are they anywhere near what it was when it originally launched on PlayStation?
No, not even close.
So is it going to damage? No, of course it's not going to damage PlayStation. So that wouldn't be taken into account. And likewise, so again, to restore any of these things going forward, that would be up to Microsoft if they want to restore the image of these franchises that have kind of been left in the lurch. And we've seen those franchises anyway go multi-plat recent years, but they're nowhere near the same size as what they used to be. So, but Call of Duty specifically this year shows why it should remain multi-plat. They knocked it out of the park with this particular Call of Duty. If they continue in the same vein and put in the same work as they have done on this Call of Duty for the next one, and we know Microsoft's aims for this franchise are to not have it as an annual release, to give it a bit of breathing space, to let them essentially evolve that franchise fully and make it better by giving it a little bit of breathing space and have a 2-year gap or a 3-year gap between releases. Essentially will allow that franchise to evolve and to get better, which for the market as a whole, even if it is multi-plat, is a better thing in my opinion. We've seen the same complaints with sports fans when you're talking about FIFAs and Maddens, etc. The same thing every year is the fact that they'll pick the game up, but is the game fundamentally different to what the previous one was the year before? No, it's not. You've just got the newest kits and the transfers have changed and you've got the new players on your team, but ultimately, is the game any different? Not really. So Microsoft's intentions for the franchise are wholly going to benefit the market, which is to give it that breathing space and not have it as an annual release. So yeah, I think the treating it as Minecraft is the best method for this going forward. It's ultimately going to be the best thing, I think, for the entirety of the market for Call of Duty as well.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. Great stuff. Crispy Bomb, let's get your opinion on this, brother. What Phil Spencer had to say really rang a bell with you. I mean, listen, no one wants prices to increase, specifically on Xbox Game Pass, and I don't think they're going to raise it anytime soon. I think maybe even after this deal, they don't raise it initially. He did say specifically that some things could raise. He didn't say what. I wouldn't be consoles, in my opinion. I don't think that they would raise the console prices. They would take the loss on that. They could potentially raise Game Pass a couple of bucks to coincide with all of the value that that they're offering. And even though I initially don't really have a problem with price increases, if I like something, there's a service I'm not going to say, yeah, charge me more. I'm not I'm not going to pull an Everborn Saga, charge them more. I'd rather keep paying the $15, but if they did raise it $2 or $3, I wouldn't be like, "Well, I'm canceling my service," because I every time Netflix raises it, I'm like, "Damn, they raise it again." But I watch so much Netflix that for me, the value proposition, it's nobody wants to pay more. What of what Phil Spencer had to say, jumped off the page for you?
Well, I mean, first of all, he's obviously doing what most of these tech giants haven't really done when they're trying to have these mergers, being very public. And I think if you really look at it, even when like Disney and Fox and all these things, like there was things said, but it wasn't quite to this extent.
Yeah, the transparency of Microsoft is unmatched. There's no doubt about it.
And I think that's going to bode well for at least the public aspect. I think, let's take the extremist out of it. and really look at it and say, Phil can't just say, "Hey, we're never going to raise prices." That would be asinine.
Right.
Okay. It would be against his shareholders and everything else, because if that's needed at a point in time, they're going to do it. I think right now, because if you look at the trading and everything else, that Microsoft is down technically. Okay, they are
everyone's
still
down.
this ginormous company, and that's where my consumer hat goes on and says, "Don't raise nothing ever." You know what I mean? But I'm also a Netflix subscriber, and I've also been like, man, I should just cancel this. And then, ooh, piece of candy. Man, I should just cancel it. Ooh, piece of candy. And we're in this drought right now, and everybody feels the inevitable. I mean, everybody's talking about Activision and everything else. You got Starfield coming out, bro. I'm gonna tell you right now, Bethesda is no joke. Okay, when it comes to public, eyes on them, they got that, and people are preparing themselves, and they're buying consoles. Now, are they going to win every MPD? But when they're competing much better, you can see people are like, well, I should just grab a Series S because I can. And it's $300. I mean, everything else is more expensive, it's almost like 3 pairs of headphones, or a couple headphones and controller. That's the way you look at it. You know what I mean? So it's one of those things where, raising a price with their value and all these other entities that, especially Sony, they would justify their $18 if they had their first party in there. I would have no argument against it. I said, if they did that,
Yep.
if they went to another tier and said tier $20 tier, but added their exclusives in there, or charge even 25 for some people, it might sound absurd, but what they're charging the consumer now and the way they're treating them, I mean, it seems more consumer friendly if you just say, okay, I'll pay the $20 or $25 a month. You know what I mean? And that's where we some of us are just baffled of some of the wording from the CMA and stuff like that. And it's like, Microsoft, for them to stay pat, regardless of the fact that, anybody could see that, these goods and everything else, like when car manufacturers can't get chips, there's a problem. And Microsoft spent a ton of money to get, precedent on a lot of chips. You know what I mean? And they were taking a loss on these consoles. They're not going to raise the price of the console. They want to get as many consoles as possible. But I do think that Project Keystone will be something down the road. You know what I mean? And I think that's what Phil, I think that's what Phil is hinting at in a way, because also that thing's not going to be able to be capable of doing certain things. And they've already branched off, prices and everything else into the PC, making a PC Game Pass instead of just Game Pass. You know what I mean? They're going to separate things, and they're going to charge what they feel is correct. So they could release a Keystone, and you might get just a flat $10 tier. You know what I mean? And that's Game Pass, and no matter what you do with it, that's what you pay for it. You know what I mean? Or they could, eventually, with all of these service games, add a tier where you get perks on certain games or free to plays or something like that. I mean, they got to do it right. If anything, if you're going to take your tier, make it more in price, add something else like a family plan to go and say, okay, well, you still have this option, because that's how you kind of branch it out. And that's how Sony tried to do it. The biggest difference is you look at day and date and not day and date. And as these games come out for Xbox, I could definitely see them raising the price. And I don't think it's going to be something crazy. They're not going to come out with some, ridiculous
$30 a month from 15.
Unless they're going to add some cosmetics or something like that, maybe. You know what I mean? But other than that, I mean, I feel that they would be like, okay, $1 or $2, or match what Sony's tier is. But hey, we got day and date exclusives. You know what I mean? And that's it. And that's all you have to say. And until Sony does something about that, that's where I say, make them compete. Make them do something good for the consumer, because they're kind of price gouging you right now. I'm just saying.
Yeah, no, they absolutely are. And listen, let's get 3-Bit's last opinion, and then we'll get everyone the heck out of here. This has been one hell of a primetime gaming. 3-Bit, what of what Phil Spencer had to say jumps off the page for you? What was it? The potential raising of Game Pass? Because again, he didn't say specifically what they would raise, but he said that
Yeah.
they could see some things raised for Xbox based on the market.
I think I'm half with Kay Asante's view and others. I'm always on the consumer side of things, right? Like having
Yes.
the best deal for me,
Right.
essentially getting the best bang for my buck, which is why I never understood a lot of Sony fan main points of argument, which is like, is Game Pass profitable? It's profitable for me. You know, there are games that came out at like $60-$70 that I got for a subscription price of just $15 a month, right? So it's actually cheaper because I stacked it, so I have Game Pass for a couple years. So I'm set. No matter what happens, I'm set for at least 2 something years. And not only that, the cost of games are increasing to like $70 in some cases, making Game Pass even more valuable to me. And while I am for that consumer side of things, trying to get the best value I can, I'm also pretty realistic. Like I feel like people have pretty high expectations usually from Microsoft compared to PlayStation to keep pumping in value without ever raising the costs. And I just think it's just going to happen. Like, can they keep it the same price? Yeah, but I always seen it as when it's going to happen, not really if. Especially when Game Pass is offering better and in even better value than PlayStation in a lot of cases. When PlayStation is charging more, and if I'm looking at my competitor who's charging an arm and a leg, just because their brand name is so strong, it kind of makes you wonder. And yeah, I think if they did want to increase, they can look at different, like a tier system, kind of what Crispy was saying. Like maybe you have that $15 a month for Ultimate and maybe an extra $5 to access Activision library or something like that. That's a way to sort of get around it, I think, if they still wanted to have that pro-consumer messaging going forward. But we'll see what they end up doing. I think it's still very early to even kind of talk about it, but I don't think they're going to increase the price anytime soon. I think Microsoft's goal right now is to continuously gain subscribers on different devices outside of the console space, right? Something that Wandering was kind of talking about. I think the mobile space is the biggest market. It's bigger than consoles and PC, right? We talked about this, and Microsoft is just seeing ways to introduce people into their ecosystem. Best way to do that is just making sure everyone gets in there, making sure Xbox is easily available everywhere without even being restricted by a console. You could play it on your phone, you could play it on your fridge. You want to play Game Pass on your Nokia, just different ways that you can get into the ecosystem. And I think Microsoft is very smart by letting Sony just focus on Call of Duty. I know Call of Duty is a huge franchise, but it almost feels like they're holding up a carrot in a lot of ways, because like you have a whole bunch of IP and franchises that are also within that deal. Like Candy Crush makes $4.2 million every single day. That's every day, like $4.2 million. So
yeah, last quarter they made $643 million.
Crazy.
Yep.
In 90
Indeed.
days.
90 days. So that's just like it's pretty smart that like Microsoft's like, yeah, worry about Call of Duty, we're gonna put that everywhere. Meanwhile, they have like these other things within the Activision deal that is going to be very profitable for them, especially if they handle those franchises the right way. You have Blizzard, making that new survival game. You have Overwatch, Diablo, World of Warcraft, all of those are amazing IP. Now, Call of Duty is still a massive game, and I understand why Sony is really worried about that, because they always market Call of Duty as like this is their baby. Like
they market it as if it's first party. Yes.
Yeah, as if it's first party, which it works for them. Because if you really think about it, a lot of casual gamers, they go towards certain franchises like Call of Duty, like FIFA, like NBA 2K, right? Those are like major games that people come to like every year, every 2 years, something like that. And Sony does have a first party thing going on where they're making super amazing experiences, but there aren't service games. They're working on that. But that is they very much rely on third party deals for that. So to sort of fill that void until they get those studios rolling, making that content.
Yep.
So yeah, I mean that's pretty much my views on it. I do think Mag he was pretty right on point with like saying like where Sony is probably the most worried about engagement out of anything. Engagement is very important to Sony, making sure people stay within their ecosystem, because that's where they're making the most money. They're not making a bunch of money just from a God of War game coming out. They're making money from people like subscribing to PS Plus and continuously just being in their service overall. So I think Sony is seeing that, and that's why they're worried about this deal. But in terms of Game Pass, I think the value is there. I'm like half and half. I don't want it to increase. I never want any subscription thing to increase. Like I've considered canceling Netflix so many times, and then they come out with some candy or something. It does make it hard. But I get it. Like I don't want to pay $60-$70 for every single game. I think it's a good value as it is right now, that I can play a brand new game for like nothing. So I mean those are my views.
No, good stuff. Listen, I got to catch up on two of the super chats that came in tonight. Drawn TJ dropped the first one of the night. Generous friend of the program. He says this after dropping a $5 super chat. I'm excited for what Phil Spencer is doing, as am I. And we also have Lucky Mo drops a $5 super chat and says Microsoft is 5 years ahead of planning over Sony. They delayed Starfield, Redfall, and they're holding back games until the ABK deal is done. And obviously, you're drinking from the same fountain that Everborn Saga is. Ladies and gentlemen, that is going to be your primetime gaming for this Wednesday evening. Thank you so much. We had 520 plus people tune in to this. I got to say a big thank you to Luke for joining us. Luke Steele, you really, really dropped some amazing knowledge bombs. Sell your brand, brother. Tell everyone what podcast that you're on, where they could subscribe to that, listen to it on a weekly basis, and where can people reach out to you on social media?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, great being here as usual. Really enjoyed that, and happy to have contributed. So yeah, you can find me on Twitter at LukeSteele90, and then in terms of podcasts, I'm on Green Pass Gaming, which is Green Pass Gaming on YouTube. That's every Sunday, 7:30 p.m. UK time, so about 2:30 p.m. Eastern. And I'm also on the Indie Game podcast with the Indie Gamer. That's once a month, and we kind of announce those sporadically. So follow me on Twitter, and you'll see all of those when they come up.
Nice, thanks. Well, thank you so much again for being here. Wandering Dutch, sell your brand, brother. Talk about your podcast today, where they can subscribe to it to help you get more subscribers and get you back into the correct algorithm of YouTube. And also, you said you had something you wanted to mention on Call of Duty.
Yeah. It's literally. I don't know whether or not a lot of people have seen this as yet, but they've announced that they are bringing raids to Call of Duty that following from the tail end of the campaign. So we're talking Destiny-style raids coming to Call of Duty.
Wow, that sounds awesome.
Yeah, that follows directly on from the actual main campaign, so it'll bring in some previous villains and enemies from the Call of Duty franchises that we've seen before, and it sounds like it's going to be absolutely awesome, and there's a lot of kind of in-depth stuff that they're going into this year. So yeah, Call of Duty's definitely definitely coming back with a bang, that's for sure.
Absolutely.
But yeah, it's been an absolute blast, of course. Great to have Luke on the show. Well, I don't think I've been on Primetime with Luke before, so it's awesome to have him here.
Yes.
Yeah, brilliant show as always. Like I say, a lot of knowledge dropped, which is great to see, and a lot of questions answered to the best of our ability. But yes, you can find me everywhere at Wondering Dutch, of course, on YouTube as well, the home of the Midweek Mix-Up podcast, which is every Wednesday and every Sunday for the weekend edition, and of course every Tuesday for the Sea of Thieves Playcast, which is a new Sea of Thieves podcast that incorporates playing with whoever our guest is as well. So it's a new one, but it's going well, and we're having fun doing it. But yeah, awesome night.
Nice, brother. Thank you. Crispy Bomb, sell your brand, brother. Talk about where can people reach out to you on social media, but what other podcasts are you a part of?
Shout out to the chat, gentlemen. Very enlightening, Luke. Glad to have you on. At Crispy Bomb on Twitter, Crispy Bomb 28, Xbox Live. You can find me tomorrow night, 8 p.m., the next podcast. I do believe I could show up for Breakfast of Boom, 10 a.m. Friday, and we got Retro Renegades Tuesday night, 7 p.m., and of course back on here on the Primetime Gaming. See you then.
Thank you so much, brother. And Kay Asante, you got a big show coming up this Saturday morning. Talk about that. Where can people subscribe to get you past 1K over on the Gaming Circle podcast? And where can people reach out to you on social media?
Yeah, Boom. Thank you so much. As usual, always great being a part of your panel. And of course, Luke, as everyone has already said, great appearance, lots of great questions answered and stuff. We really appreciate you spending some time with us and setting some of the records straight. And of course, 3-Bit, you as well. Always great hearing your takes on the industry and the things that you're a part of as well. Yeah, you can find me, TKO Asante, Xbox, PlayStation, all those places. We had some interesting guests over the last week on the Gaming Circle podcast. We had the one and only Jez Corden on, being a little fun and slanderous on our Saturday morning show. He was nursing a hangover, but he still had some fun with us, which was really good. So go check that out if you haven't. And yeah, as the weeks come on, there'll be some vacations here and there that are coming up. So the show will still have some content for you. You stay tuned for more, but we'll be putting some interesting things in the feed. So we appreciate all the people who are checking us out. We're slowly but surely heading towards that 1,000 subscribers. So thank you guys again, and appreciate all the support.
Thank you very much. And last, no way least, 3-Bit, what's going on, brother? What do you personally have going on, and where can people find you on other shows, as well as reach out to you on social media?
Yeah, it's been a pleasure. It's been a while.
Yeah,
I've been on here, and I've always said that Boom is the person where I even first started podcasting. He was pretty much the first show I've been on, so I've always appreciated Boom, and his community is amazing. So thanks for having me on, Boom. Everybody here has been awesome. Luke, it was really cool hearing your points of view and everything. Everyone can find me on Twitter at i3bits. I'm finishing up my work on Fable. Great stuff. And
awesome.
Doing commercials. That's pretty much what I do now. It fills up my podcasting time. So I can't podcast as much as I used to, but I definitely try to jump in when I can. So thanks for having me, everybody. And I'll see you guys on the next one.
Well, thank you so much. I love how he says it so subtly. I'm finishing up my work on Fable. Oh, that's all. I love it. Listen, it's great to have you back, and we definitely got to get you back here when you have some free time. So thanks for joining us, ladies and gentlemen. A big shout out to the super chats that came in. Obviously, those allow for us to continue to do the big giveaways. The next two are coming next week. Halloween, we're giving $200 away, and then on that Breakfast of Boom that Friday, we're giving $300 away for Mrs. Boom's birthday bash. So $500 worth of giveaways in next week. One on Monday for $200, one on Friday for $300. Of course, the first half of those go to channel members. If you are a channel member, you will get first crack at those. And then obviously the second half that is left over will be anyone that is live in the chat. If you're live in the chat, we will put your name into a picker, and the picker picks a winner, and then you pick where you want your gift card to go. And that obviously is going to be either a Nintendo, PlayStation, or of course Xbox. And if you are outside of the United States, we do still give those winnings to you through PayPal. We will then send that money's worth of gift card to you through PayPal, because it's the safest way for me and Mrs. Boom not to get robbed or cheated out of the money, and we trust PayPal. So it's very easy to make an account, and they do cross lines internationally. We can send you your denominational value in your country, whether it be the UK or anywhere in the world. We will send that money to you to make sure that everyone that supports the channel does in fact have a chance to win. And of course, I'm going to close out the show, folks, with something that's important to me. Hopefully one day be important to you. And that's something that my dad taught us when we were kids. And he would say, Craig, treat others how you want to be treated. And also, it doesn't cost anything to be nice. You live by those rules, son. I can guarantee you're going to have an awesome day. So take care of everyone. And we'll see you next week on the newest episode of Primetime Gaming with Mr. Boomstick and Friends.